Welcome everyone to this week's episode of the Animal Liberation Hour, where we seek insight from animal rights and liberation activists around the world so that we can think, reflect, learn, and be inspired. My name is Trey and I am honored and thrilled that I got the chance to sit down with Soul Eubanks. If you know him online, you probably know him as Soul Eubanks. I know him as my friend Chris. We've been doing activism together for a few years now, and I'm so glad that he got a chance to sit down and provide his crucial insight. Chris is an environmental, human, and animal rights activist. He's from Atlanta, Georgia. He was raised there, and he's dedicated himself to doing advocacy work that combats all forms of injustice. After learning about the horrors of animal exploitation, Chris became vegan and began doing community organizing. He took action, and he even helped co-organize Atlanta's first ever animal rights march, which I was blessed enough to attend. Chris plans to use education, public speaking, and creativity as tools to advocate for collective liberation and to end all forms of injustice. You are not going to want to miss what Chris had to say. But before we get into the episode, I want to remind everyone that the Animal Liberation Hour podcast is a project of Animal Activism Mentorship. AAM is a free multinational program that helps aspiring animal rights activists, as well as those who are already activists but want to take their activism to the next level. From one-on-one mentorship to free workshops and trainings to this podcast, AAM seeks to empower humans to fight for animals so that the world will have more activists and we can achieve liberation sooner. For more information, you can visit animalactivismmentorship.com and follow AAM on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Animal Activism Mentorship. You can keep up with the Animal Liberation Hour on AAM social media as well. Animal Activism Mentorship is fueled by Farm Animal Rights Movement. Well, without any further delay, I hope that you enjoy the conversation I had with my friend Christopher Soul Eubanks. All right, my friend Chris is here. He's an AAM mentor. He's the founder of Apex Advocacy and so many other things. We might be here all day if we list all his accomplishments and different organizations he's affiliated with. But Chris, it's so awesome to have you here, man. Thanks for being here on the podcast.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Glad to be a part of AAM. You know, I remember when it was first starting. It was like, hey, you reached out to me like, hey, you want to be a mentor? And I was like, what exactly are we doing? And you broke it down. I was like, okay, cool. And now it's like this whole organization with tours and farm and all of these incredible things. So I'm just happy to be here.
Oh man, yeah. I mean, it's a pleasure to work alongside you, man. And I know the most recent time we got to do activism together was in Chicago, and you know, it was you gave an incredible speech in front of YSL, and yeah, that's like one of my most memorable moments of doing activism with you is that speech. You're a great speaker, and I just appreciate you being here today, man. So my first question for you is where did it all begin? How did you become vegan, and how did you become an activist?
So I always kind of go back into my teenage years because growing up, I was vegetarian for about a decade. I started when I was pretty much 17 years old. I read this book, How to Eat to Live by Elijah Muhammad. And he just talked about, and the reason I read this book is because I watched Malcolm X and read I read the autobiography of Malcolm X, which is one of my favorite books. And in it references how to eat to live. And there was just these reports about Malcolm X and how his body was so clean when they did his autopsy. And they said that he had a vegetarian diet and probably would have been vegan in modern times. But so I read How to Eat to Live, and that inspired me to go vegetarian over a period of time. So I was 13 years old. I didn't have any vegetarian friends. And at this time, it was just a dietary thing. It wasn't ethical. But I decided, okay, every 2 years, I'm going to stop eating a different type of animal, just because I really didn't know how my body would accept it. I figured, okay, if I stop in increments of, every other year, I should be fine. So I stopped eating pigs at 13, stopped eating cows at 15, stopped eating chickens and fishes at 17. So I was vegetarian. I did that for about a decade, and I just kind of felt out of place and weird. So I actually started back eating animal products. But in 2014, I quit my job. And when I quit my job in corporate America, I started to do a lot of self-discovery about who I am, what's important to me, what I wanted to be in life, the kind of person that I wanted to be, what was important. And fortunately, I saved up enough money to live for a year or two without having to worry about bills. So I did a lot of self-reflection in this time. And I also add that growing up, I was very aware of social injustices. Just growing up Black, young in America and in the world, it's kind of hits you at a very young age, the discrimination that exists within our society. So that was always in the forefront of my mind. So I quit my job, discovered what was really important to me, and started to think about being vegetarian again and possibly vegan. And one day I was just scrolling on Netflix, trying my best to learn about being a better environmentalist. And I saw Cowspiracy pop up, and I was like, oh, you know what? I've been meaning to watch this. Watched it, and right then and there, I became plant-based and threw all the animal products out of my refrigerator because, like I said, I was trying to be the best environmentalist that I could be. And knowing that I was contributing to, degrading the environment by consuming animal products, automatically right then and there I said, this is something that I can't do. I can't consider myself the environmentalist that I want to be if I'm consuming animal products, knowing how much harm and destruction they cause to the environment. So fast forward maybe 6 months or so, I'm researching a little bit more about veganism, just learning about it since I'm now plant-based. And I come across a lot of the vegan outreach online from people like James Aspey, Earthling Ed. I'm watching interviews from Gary Yourofsky, and now all of the ethical seeds are being planted in my brain. So I would say about 6 months after becoming plant-based, I decided to become vegan because now it was an ethical thing. Now I really make the connection that, wow, I am sponsoring violence, oppression, harm by consuming animal products, not just making it worse for the environment. So that's when I really became vegan and started doing activism in my local community. I started organizing with Anonymous for the Voiceless. I did an internship with the Humane League, started doing some stuff with PETA and other organizations, and also just started using social media. So that's pretty much the story of how I became vegan. It's kind of started when I was vegetarian. I'll say those were the seeds that were planted, but ethically around 4 or 5 years ago, a little bit over 5 years now, is what made me kind of head towards the path that I'm on now.
Yeah. You talked about that time you had of reflection and kind of self-discovery. What do you think the world might be like if more of us, got some time like that? Because I feel like I've been blessed enough to have some time like that as well. And that's where a lot of my growth has come from. But I feel like, a lot of people either don't make that a priority or don't have the opportunity for that self-reflection maybe. And yeah, talk about how important that was for you and what the world might be like if we all took some time to self-reflect, because I feel like so many people are just caught up in the day-to-day survival or going through the motions or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, for me, it was life-changing because I really had the opportunity to learn who I am and what's important to me. At the time I was making a decent amount of money, so I was able to, buy things that were nice and fill up my apartment with some decent things. And I could have bought a house had I been thinking, but after a while, you just start to realize, wait, okay, I can buy more shoes, I can buy more paintings on the wall, but it really, at the end of the day, it's just more things. And it's like, okay, what is really important to me? And once you get past that want or desire for material things, you're like, okay, what really makes me happy? This spending money at some furniture store isn't going to do it. What's going to really motivate me to be who I want to be in life? And I think if the world had more of that and didn't have to worry about our basic needs, we probably wouldn't have to do the work that me and you are doing now. We probably wouldn't have to even fight for animal liberation. We wouldn't have to fight against these injustices, because I think our society would be vibrating at a higher level. I don't know, maybe we would all be vegan and would all be understanding of how to eliminate all oppression from our society, or maybe not. I do feel we would be at least closer to to our potential than we are right now, because it's really powerful when you don't have to worry about where your next meal is coming from, when you aren't really caught up in the Joneses of, do I have to buy these new shoes to look cool? When all of those things are eliminated, you really start to vibrate at a different level and on a different frequency, and what's important to you totally can shift and transition. And I think also, if we were all to do that collectively, it would also be a different transfer of energy. If we kind of have that when we're around each other, like you spoke about being in Chicago, when you're around people that inspire you and people that are on the same wavelength, you feel like you can do more. You feel empowered to be a better person. And I think if we were all able to do that as a society, as a collective, who knows what could be accomplished. But I do think the world would be vibrating at a much higher frequency.
Yeah, that's another thing. How many people just don't have that type of community? Obviously, like for me and probably for you too, I found that community after that transition to veganism and, a desire to want to be active. But yeah, I mean, how has this, has that time of self-discovery, has that changed how you advocate at all? Have you kind of brought that into your advocacy as far as realizing that a lot of these people that are not vegan yet, maybe they just haven't had that time of self-reflection, trying to figure out the person they want to be, trying to reflect on the potential harm that they're causing?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's a combination of that and one just being, I'm a real just relaxed, calm natured, stoic kind of person. That's just how I'm made. That's just how I'm wired. But that understanding of, wow, everyone isn't in a position to have that time to discover what's really important to them. A lot of people are literally in the race of just trying to survive. And when you're in survival mode, you can't really be the best version of yourself. And, you can do the best that you can, but you really can't excel to what you could be if you didn't have to worry about those things. So, working, I've been fortunate to, even though I technically have a job with an animal rights organization, I'm still doing the things that I would be doing if I weren't working for that organization. So I'm lucky in a sense where I do what I want to do for a living. So I can still think about the person that I want to be and work towards being a better version of myself. So many people don't have that opportunity. So many people in our society get caught up in the legalities of our society, the oppression in our society, the systems of discrimination. So that definitely is something that I think about when I'm doing vegan outreach and when I'm speaking to other people. I've kind of come to the realization that I can't let other people's decisions impact my energy. So I'm going to do everything that I can to share information with them, be unapologetic in who I am. But at the end of the day, they have the right to make the decisions that they're going to make, whether it's better for our society or worse. it's not a lot that I can personally do about other people's choices. So I say, you know what, I place my effort and I place the value of my effectiveness in how prepared I am and how organized and how structured and how much time and energy I put into being a better activist and not necessarily the results.
Yeah, for sure. I want to go back to something that you said earlier, which was that it can be hard for people to take on another injustice or have time for that self-reflection if they're in survival mode. I think this is a good segue into intersectionality, and I'd like to know what intersectionality means to you, because I feel like every time someone in our movement uses that word, it means something different. I think there's a lot of confusion around the word. I think a lot of people see this word as a threat to making the animal rights movement about someone other than animals. But it is all interconnected, right? So explain what intersectionality means to you, and how you feel about it, and do you think it makes us more effective animal rights activists to be intersectional by your definition?
Yeah, I tend to lean towards Patrice Crenshaw's kind of explanation of it. And she's the person that coined the term. She's a highly intelligent Black woman, and she coined the phrase. I think she's in the legal field, if I'm correct. And she coined the term, I think, in the late 80s. And she spoke about how when she was doing research and work, how sometimes there were overlapping things that weren't being addressed when we were analyzing certain types of discrimination and oppression. And I think one of the instances was she was talking about why young women of color were more likely to be suspended from schools for a certain period of time. And she said some of it has to do with the fact that they are young women in the school system that's not really taking in account what they need. But another part of it is that they are young Black women. And whenever people looked at why and examined why, they never looked at both of those issues. They kind of looked at them separately and didn't connect the dots that, there's some overlap here. Not only are they facing this thing, they're also facing that thing. And how I connect that to, it's so many ways that can connect to our movement. But one of the things that I look at when I'm talking about intersectionality in our community is the fact that the activists, this is a movement unlike other movements where the people that are advocating for the rights aren't the people that are advocating for the rights for themselves. We're advocating on the behalf of animals, non-human animals. So that means that us as humans, we have a lot of interpersonal issues and a lot of things that impact us as a species that don't even have to do with the rights of the other species that we're talking about. So if we aren't able to address, the things that impact us, then it's no way we can be as effective as we can. I think it's like, avoiding marriage counseling. If your marriage can't really be successful if there's problems there, but you just continue to ignore it, or any type of relationship. So I think, as activists, we have to understand that there are some intersections. There are some ways that people of the global majority are discriminated against that also impact animals. They're victims in different ways of same types of systems that exploit mass amounts of individuals. So I just think we can't ignore these overarching systems of oppression that not only impact non-human animals, but also impact humans. And by addressing that within the animal rights movement, I think that actually makes us stronger if we're able to have these conversations, these nuanced conversations about, these are white supremacist structures and hierarchies that exist that are exploiting human animals and that are exploiting non-human animals. So I think I know that was a lot. I think it's always a lot when we talk about intersectionality. Some people can, say it nice and succinct, but whenever I think about it, it's always a flood of thoughts that come to mind, and I try to address all of them because it's such a nuanced conversation, and that's another reason that I think we have to address it. It's because there's so much to discuss, and if we don't discuss it, I think we're doing a huge disservice to not only us but also to the animals.
I thought you did a great job of explaining it, and I love that you went to, I say past movements, but really movements that, continue. When you were talking about the young black women in school, I mean, even black women had to struggle to be a part of the conversation about women's rights. And it's like that Sojourner Truth speech, "Ain't I a woman?" They had to fight for that, and of course those struggles continue today in different ways. I think this is a good segue into asking you about your new organization, Apex Advocacy, which is about animal rights and intersectionality. So tell us what you're doing over there, about your team over there, and what you're hoping to accomplish.
Yeah, I think, Apex Advocacy, the acronym is APEX, Animal Protection, Equality, Intersectionality. And what I'm trying to do is, make space for advocates of color, not only advocates of color, but often when I go to animal rights events or when I see animal rights discussed or talked about publicly, there's not as much diversity as I would like. And I feel that people of color are typically marginalized in our society, and we have a lot to offer to the animal rights movement. We have a lot of different perspectives. We have a lot of firsthand interactions with dealing with mass systems of oppression. So I would like to make a space where people of color can come in, share their ideas, thoughts on animal rights, on how to be effective for the animals, and not ignore who they are. I feel like a lot of times in our community, in the animal rights community, a lot of people of color have to, somewhat suppress who they are or suppress their identity to fit in because the majority of the movement doesn't look like them. So we don't get to express ourselves in the way that we feel most comfortable, or maybe we don't feel comfortable coming to events. Maybe we don't feel comfortable with initiatives and ideas, and we really don't have the voice or the backing to share our thoughts and share our opinions and perspectives. So I would like Apex to be a place where, once again, I don't want to limit to only people of color, because I think we all could fight for animal rights and we all should be fighting for the rights of non-human animals. But I want Apex to be a space where the plight of people of color within animal rights and within our society isn't ignored, and we can learn from our experiences and implement some of the things that we've learned in our travels and in our fights against injustice and apply them in our advocacy work. So I have it's a small team right now. It's me and 4 other advocates and creatives, and we're creating content right now. We're creating some thought-provoking content, and my plans for next year is to start to begin to do activism. I want to be very strategic in the activism that we do. Sometimes I'm a little bit of an overthinker, so I like to map out the type of action we're going to do and who is it going to be targeted and how the look is going to be presented. So that's what I'm thinking about right now, thinking about the type of actions that I want to do. And I also want to get input from other advocates about the actions that I do with Apex. But yeah, ultimately, I think I want to challenge the status quo. I want to give voices to people in the animal rights community where there may haven't been before. And I think a good example of that is, the piece we put out recently about World Vegan Day. Oftentimes when we talk about World Vegan Day, it's just celebratory, and there's nothing wrong with that. We should celebrate World Vegan Day. But when we look into the history of it and why it's on November 1st, it's just because the Vegan Society said it should be. That was the day they chose to recognize, because they knew the Vegan Society started in 1994 in November. They just didn't know the exact day. So they said it'll be November 1st. And there's nothing wrong with acknowledging that, but there have been tons of, vegan philosophies and philosophies about the rights of animals well before 1944. And a lot of those don't get acknowledged, or a lot of those, cultural impacts from those communities don't get acknowledged. So that's what I wanted to do with our addressing of World Vegan Day, is to look at it from a different angle and say, you know what? Yeah, this is a great day, but let's go a little bit deeper into it. Let's look under the microscope. And use a microscope to look at why this is this way. Who said it was this way? Is this reflective of all of us, or did this just once again come from, a supremacist society that just says this is the day that we're going to choose and this is how we're going to go about it? So I definitely want to challenge the status quo, and I want a space where people can come in and think these kind of ideas and contribute them to the animal rights movement.
Yeah, I read that article and it was extremely informative and educational, and I was blown away by it. Really, I wasn't surprised, to hear about all the history of veganism. People have been vegan for a long time, but yeah, it's always good to have those things that say, why are things the way they are, and why haven't we acknowledged this more? I thought it was very insightful. And speaking of articles and essays, you wrote an essay last year entitled "As a Black Man, I Was Uncomfortable Becoming an Animal Activist," and I'm guessing part of this is what stemmed Apex Advocacy and what you're doing now. That essay was later published in the book Antiracism in Animal Advocacy, which my copy's on the way. I can't wait to read that. But I did read your essay, and I was going to pick a part of the essay to talk about, but I was having a really hard time picking just one section to discuss because the entire essay is so valuable. You mentioned some things from past movements that happened, like everything with COINTELPRO and the Black Panthers, which a lot of activists may not know about. You talked about how the animal rights movement can be perceived by non-vegans a particular kind of way. You talked about some of your own experiences as a Black animal rights activist. Is there any of that or anything I didn't mention in the essay that you might just want to dive deeper into? Because I thought it was just extremely thought-provoking, and you kind of led us into your world a little bit, and I think it made a lot of people think, the people that read it. So if there's anything in there that you'd want to dive deeper into, I'd be happy to hear about it.
Yeah, I think, one of the points that you mentioned was the perception of the animal rights movement. And that's something that I don't think we think about much as a movement. I think we look at all the things that we're doing, but self-awareness is so important. I think, when we aren't aware of how we are perceived, we don't know what to work on. We don't know what to fix. We don't know what to alter or add or subtract. And in the midst of us doing so many incredible things, I think we don't realize that when we see pictures or events, that's mostly white led or white dominated, how that looks to people on the outside. And, we definitely shouldn't be ashamed of, who comes to events. I'm not saying that we should feel embarrassed or maybe on some level we should feel embarrassed if, the people of the global majority aren't white, but a lot of times we see mostly white-centered initiatives, or we see pictures or videos of mostly white people at events. Maybe we should at least think about that. We should say, hey, why is this? There's a lot of people in the world of a lot of different ethnicities and races, but why do we traditionally see not see as much diversity as we could? So I think the self-awareness is one of the things that I really wanted to touch on in that, because anytime I learn information about myself and someone tells me something about myself, I tend to look at it as like, oh wow, okay, let me see what I can improve on. I appreciate getting that information because I like learning new things about myself and trying to fix and repair. But it seems often like the animal rights community kind of ignores that criticism about itself, that constructive criticism. And, that's not, that may not be limited to the animal rights movement. Other movements may have that involved in their movements too. But I think it's very different within the animal rights community just because, once again, we are fighting for the rights of others. Non-human animals don't have the ability to fight against systems of oppression. So with us, we have to be very keen and aware of how we are perceived. And if we want to really do more for the animals, we can't just be satisfied with the results that we are doing. We have to think about how we can get better and how we can involve more people. And especially if we are not allowing the global majority of people to come in and feel welcome, that says a lot about the movement itself. I will say that there are tons of people around the world and from different cultures, different ethnicities, doing amazing work in animal rights. But we do tend to see the face of it looks one way, the feel of it, the main organizations that get highlighted, are typically ran by the same type of people. So I think that self-awareness is one of the things that was really important that I get across. And like you said, there are so many things in the article that I discussed. And afterwards, I really had to take a minute before I read it again. I worked on it for a while, and it was really draining because it was so many things that I wanted to touch on. It felt like writing a book in a sense, like trying to compress my thoughts for a book into, a few pages. So after I wrote it, I probably didn't read it again for a month or two just to let it breathe. And when I came back and read it a month or so later, I was able to appreciate it a little bit more, because when people were contacting me saying, hey, this is very thought provoking, I appreciate it. At that point, I was just thinking, okay, at this point, it's just a bunch of words to me. I can't even process what's been written. It's just, I've been working on it for so long. I no longer really saw the value in it. But afterwards, I was able to go back and look at it through a different set of eyes. So yeah, that self-awareness is great. And, one of the things that I also mentioned was, being a Black person at a event where it turns hostile, and the rodeo protest that me and you experienced, and that was very different for a person of color than someone that wasn't a person of color. Just how I saw it, how I felt during it, how I experienced it. And I think that's also like a microcosm of how a lot of people feel in general. A lot of people of color feel about animal rights. They feel almost that awkwardly sometimes when they are thinking about being involved in animal rights, or when they go to animal rights events. I think I told a friend about that story, or she read about that story, and she told me how she one time spoke to an event organizer, and they were going to an event that was in a more conservative part of town, and she was, as a person of color, she was a little nervous, saying, hey, this is a part of town where, it's not a lot of people of color. So, I don't want this event to be about me, but I do want to know, hey, can we have this discussion about, what this looks like for people of color to be in this environment? And she said the organizer just simply dismissed her and said, that's irrelevant. We're all here for the animals. So, not even having the ability to have that conversation, people, we're losing advocates. We're losing potential advocates, and that really hurts the animals. So I think if we just want to be more effective for the animals, we're going to need a lot more people, and a lot more people of the global majority to be a part of this movement?
I think maybe that organizer maybe didn't yet or doesn't yet understand the power of bringing all different kinds of people together, and that obviously means creating an environment. I mean, activism isn't always comfortable like in other ways, you know what I mean? Like sometimes we have to go up against systems and it's uncomfortable, but you should at least feel comfortable around your fellow activists and know that they've got your back and you've got their back. I mean, I think that should be obvious.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think about like Fred Hampton and the Rainbow Coalition, you know what I mean? Like, that's part of why the FBI hated him so much and wanted to take him out so much, is because of his ability to bring people together, all different kinds of people. And if somebody can do that, then I think that's where the power lies. If you're able to bring people together, if you're able to create those types of environments where people have each other's backs, especially if there's a lot of diversity, there's extreme power in that. And yeah, I do wish people understood that more. And there's nothing about that takes away from the animals in any way. I am a believer that the animal rights movement should be about the animals because it's the animal rights movement, but there's overlap and it's undeniable. You know what I mean? It's undeniable, and ultimately, if we address these things and find some sort of way to all be included, I think that that's going to go a really long way for the animals. I think that's what has to happen for us to even have a movement at all.
Yeah, I agree. And I agree 1000%. And this movement belongs to the animals. And I think oftentimes people think that it's going to be a competition, or that, addressing these things will take away from the animals. And I feel the complete opposite. I feel like this is going to strengthen the movement by having these discussions, because I do think that we can absolutely have discussions about race and power and oppressive systems within the animal rights movement and still be 100% dedicated to the animals. I don't think one has to take away from the other. I think we can be balanced in that way. And personally, I'm not advocating for anyone to take away time from organizing events about animals and take on causes that maybe aren't as that they aren't as well versed about just for appearances, because I think that wouldn't be authentic. And even myself, I don't do much activism outside of animal rights activism. Sure, I go to climate protests here and there. I've done Black Lives Matters events here and there, but primarily animal activism is what I do for a living. So, but once again, that doesn't mean that I can't have these conversations and talk about these things. It doesn't mean that I have to take a sign to an animal rights protest and say, you know what, there's little representation here at this protest. No, it just means that I'm going to go to the protest. I'm going to advocate. I'm going to, do that. And then also going to address any inequities that I see. So I think both can be done. We can be 100% devoted to the animals and also fight against things that we see that are problematic within the community.
100%. Thanks for your insight on that. Still going with that theme, our friend Shreya wanted me to ask you this question. She said you and her have talked about it some, but this is what she wants to ask. As we work at making the animal rights movement more diverse and inclusive, how does that reframe the way we strategize actions like protests where confronting the police is a norm?
Oh, yeah. So I know why she asked this, because I was just talking to her about this in great lengths, because I have so many thoughts on this. And this is something that's really been at the forefront of my mind ever since we did this recent tour that we spoke about here in Atlanta. But I do think, and this is something that I also learned from, not, I don't want to say learned, but was just more, was reemphasized after I went to the Animal Liberation Conference this past month in California, in Oakland. And they spoke about making sure that the things that we do at actions don't put other activists at risk, because certain activists are more vulnerable than others. And I think that's when it kind of ties into intersectionality a little bit, or it can. But we never know what our activists are going through in terms of their legal status, their they may have warrants. Who knows? They may have a bevy of situations around them. And when they come to an event, sure, activism is supposed to be, it can be challenging, it can be confrontational with the public, but it doesn't always have to be. And us as people in the actions, we have to keep in mind that we have to do everything that we can to protect the people that are with us. So the way one of us acts ultimately impacts the way all of us are perceived. I'm not saying you have to be a perfect angel. I'm just saying that you have to be mindful of that. So the way I speak to the police at actions is very, only what I need to say, only the basics. I literally don't discuss anything else. If they ask me, what am I doing later? I don't know. Were you here a few weeks ago? I have no idea what I was doing a few weeks ago. I only really talk specifically about the event at hand and everything that I need to, because I understand that as a Black man in America, police perceive me a different way. As a person of color, we are perceived a different way. And I feel a lot better when I only have to discuss the absolute essentials. And I think that's just smart activism in general. I don't get into back and forth with the police about anything. It's literally what is going on at the event right now, right here, and anything else is pretty irrelevant. So yeah, we had a lengthy conversation about that, because I do all that I can to talk to the police if need be. There are some times when I tell people that are, heckling us or security at certain buildings and facilities to call the police so they can rectify the situation, because I'm prepared when I tell them to do that. But other than that, I try to not really be involved with talking to the police at all. As an organizer, it's something that I've become a lot more familiar with it. But as a person, just as a person of color, it's something that I'm not really comfortable doing. So it's a little overlap there with, and maybe that's why my approach is I'm only going to say what I absolutely have to say and what I need to say, and anything else is irrelevant to the conversation and the interaction. So yeah, I think I've been thinking about that a lot, and I think as a community we do need to know. And this is something you told me on the AAM tour, is that some people have police trauma, and that's something that I never thought about either. But it's something that I've experienced, honestly. Anytime I interact with the police, I just prefer not to. But I do it at events for the sake of making everyone else feel more comfortable, because I am an organizer and I have a lot more experience. So it's only right that I be the person that speak to them. But there's so much on this topic. I have so many other thoughts about dealing with the police and who should or who shouldn't, that we'd be here all day. But I'm really getting my thoughts together more, because I think I want to either write about this or talk about it on a larger scale, maybe put out some content around this topic. But it's something that we should, as a community, be mindful of. I think, like you said earlier, anytime you do activism, there's a chance that anything can happen on a certain level. But I think we can be smart about how we engage with the police and why we engage with the police.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's great that first of all, Shreya asked this question, and you know, that y'all were having this conversation in general, because yeah, I mean, I think it, hopefully if there's any organizers who are listening to this, or anybody who plans on organizing animal rights events, this will just give you a little bit of insight on what we've just talked about. Whenever I'm organizing something, I like to tell everybody there is always a risk. Even if the plan is not to get arrested, even if, you know, we're seemingly doing everything within the law, there's always a chance that some police officer who doesn't know the law or just wants to be a certain type of way or whatever can arrest you, whether you've broken the law or not. And that's just how our world works, unfortunately. And everyone needs to know that. So, you know, whenever, you know, I'm planning a protest or a disruption or something like that, I tell everyone, you know, the risk for this particular, you know, action is probably low, but there's always a chance that we are not planning on getting arrested. That's not part of our strategy for this particular event, but that isn't to say that it couldn't happen. And when you are thorough like that in your briefings, if there is someone who is comfortable enough to confide in you that, you know, they have police trauma, or, you know, what their legal status is, or something like that, they can tell you, and then you can further advise them, you know, hey, well, stay on the other side of the street. Even then there's a risk, or hey, maybe this isn't the action for you. Maybe you can join us for dinner after, and we can plan an action that would be better suited for you. Those types of things, because yeah, that's, as an organizer, you don't want someone, you know, something happening to somebody that they're not going to have any kind of expectation of at all, if you can help it. Sometimes unexpected things happen, but you want to try to be as, prepared as possible, for sure.
And it's, you know, to add to that, it's funny because on the tour that we just finished in Atlanta and Florida, literally the first day we went over police training earlier in the day. The second event is a chalking event. And for you, you know, the chalking events are light. There's nothing, we're just chalking on the ground. It's the form of activism that I introduce people to. I tell people, hey, you can bring your kids. It's fine. It's a lighthearted event. It's nothing. Typically, that's one of the lowest risk types of actions that you can do. Got to the event, police came, and what made it worse was that someone at the event, and this just goes with the power of, like you said, organizing and leading. I spoke with everyone before. I guess some people came later, and maybe they didn't hear, you know, everything that was going on. They came. One person wrote on one part of there was this gazebo. It's a concrete gazebo. One person wrote, "If you're not vegan, F you." And there was some conversations with the public. Some of the activists had got into it with the public. So now people are calling the police on us. The police come. Shreya is trying to erase or trying to cover up the F you. The police walk by. Give me your ID. We're getting reports of vandalism. They see "if you're not vegan, F you" on the wall. Now they're thinking, okay, the police are thinking, okay, these are some radicals. They are spray painting and writing curse words all over the walls. And it's just like you said, how one small thing, that one negative interaction you had with the public, someone called the police. The police come, they see curse words on the wall now. Now these situations are elevated. And like I said, chalking is the lowest intense form of activism that I could think of. And now we have swarms of police surrounding us.
The same thing has happened to me with police and chalking. When we were on the AAM tour in Florida, you know, we were doing all these actions where we're like going up inside of stores and, you know, chanting and doing all this stuff. The most police we ever saw on that whole tour is when we were chalking on the sidewalk at a park. There was some security guard on a golf cart that got really upset with us for chalking. And we're chalking like vegan is love and,
exactly,
you know, like stuff like this, and handing out leaflets and, you know, And this guy got so upset. He even got in one of the activists' face, a female. And then I said something to him and he challenged me. He said, "What are you going to do about it?" Like, I'm like, bro, what? And yeah, I counted all the police cars there and it was the most, it was the most we had out of the whole entire tour. When, like I said, we were, going 20, 25 deep inside of stores, like disrupting and everything else, like even the big 20 something plus Neiman Marcus disruption we did. I don't know if it had as many cop cars as that chalking event did. Yeah. So yeah, it just goes to show you that you really never know what to expect. You've got to be prepared. And going back to just interacting with the police in general, just a resource I'd like to throw out there, and if you have any, I'd like to hear those as well. But for anybody listening who wants to brush up on their police interaction skills, there's a YouTube channel called Flex Your Rights that I think is extremely helpful.
Yeah, that's what we use for the training in the morning. That's the video we showed.
Oh yeah. They've got a lot of great content over there. So anybody who is thinking of being an organizer or a police liaison, or even if you're not, it's really good to watch just for normal everyday interactions with the police as well, traffic stops and things of that nature. I think it'd be good for anyone to watch.
Yeah. And DXC, I forget the exact website, but if you look up DXC police training, they have a pretty good one also. If you're an organizer and you're trying to make sure that the activists are or that you cover the events good for the activists, they have a pretty thorough police training that they offer too.
Definitely. So this is a pretty general question. So but yeah, and we've talked about some of this, but what can the animal rights movement do just to be better? Because I know, like, for me, some days I'm high on the animal rights movement, and some days I'm low on the animal rights movement. When I do an event and I'm surrounded by amazing people and we're just all working toward this common goal, I'm like, oh yes, when we're accomplishing things, I'm like, yes, I really get like a high on that. But yeah, I mean, I won't go into detail, but of course there's other things that like make us feel low and make us feel like, do we even have a movement sometimes? It depends on the day sometimes. But in your opinion, maybe even if it's just one thing, what's something that people can do just to improve the animal rights movement, and what we can do to improve ourselves to make the animal rights movement better beyond what we've already discussed?
Oh, that's such a loaded question. There's so many things that we can do. I had a few in my mind as you were asking the question. I think earlier, like I was saying, be self-aware, be cognizant of how we are perceived, be open-minded and accepting, or at least open-minded to new ideas and new concepts. I will also say, don't look at the activism that we do as having to be so results oriented. I know a lot of, and I understand that we're transitioning to getting more information about our events, and I think a lot of the things that we do over the next couple of years in the animal rights movement will be about learning, okay, if we have vegan outreach, how many people actually went to the sites to see what the information that we're passing out? Did the people that I handed out a pamphlet to really go and read the pamphlet? And finding results from our actions is great, but I don't think that we should all be hyper-focused on the results. I think a lot of activists feel like if they have a conversation with someone and they don't go vegan, then the conversation was it just wasn't meaningful. I think we have to sometimes just let go of some of that pressure to be perfect. Also understand that, when we have critiques of the movement, or when people bring up things in the movement that may seem to be troubling, I think this is a time to actually look at the movement and see how we can progress. Like I think, unfortunately, there's, some issues of sexual harassment or sexual assault within the movement. And when these things are discussed, sometimes people automatically look at it as being bad for the movement. I don't automatically look at it like that. I see that this is an opportunity for us to have a conversation about what's happening and how can we grow and learn and improve. Like, what is our responsibility during these situations? Because we operate in a lot of uncertainty. We operate, we aren't a corporation. So we don't have handbooks for how to handle everything. Some organizations put out things and put out instructions about, maybe as a movement, we should do this and do that. But as a whole, we don't collectively have a set of rules that we all abide by. So I think just understanding that this is a growing movement filled with flawed individuals, and that there's going to be a lot of learning, there's going to be a lot of uncomfortable moments, and being accepting of that and understanding of that, and not always equating it to being a negative thing for the movement is one. So I guess we can look at the cup as half empty or half full, but like I said, there's so many things that we can do to improve as a movement. I think that's a book within itself, honestly. But yeah, those are just a few things that pop up in my mind.
I feel like that and your essay, we could probably do a whole podcast episode by itself.
Oh, absolutely.
All right, so this is my last question for you, unless you just have anything to add. If you were in a room full of brand new animal rights activists right now, what advice would you give them?
Ooh, that's a great question, or a great thing. Honestly, one thing I would say is be mindful of self-care. And I was just actually about to bring that up. So doing animal rights activism is different from doing other types of activism, especially with the type of actions that you do. It can be traumatic, especially depending on the type of actions that you do. So sometimes something like chalking isn't as traumatic for you as opposed to something like Meet the Victims or going to a vigil. And I would say do the activism that you feel comfortable with, and don't ever feel like you have to do a certain type of action. Don't ever feel like you have to do a certain number of actions. Do what your spirit allows. Some people like Shannon, she can do probably 6 or 7 events a day, and she could probably do that for months on end. Now, I could probably do 6 or 7 events a day, but after 2 days, I might be drained. So we shouldn't feel that we have to keep up with other people or compare our activism. Or if we aren't doing something like bearing witness that our activism isn't really important, or if we aren't doing a disruption, our activism isn't making the impact that it could be. So honestly, you really have to custom your activism based on how sustainable it is for you, because we need people that are going to be activists and advocates for the rest of their lives, not just people that are going to be advocates for a month or a year. We want this animal exploitation is unfortunately going to be happening for the foreseeable future. So we need people that are going to be along for the ride to help combat it for the foreseeable future. So definitely make sure that your activism is sustainable. If that means taking a break every month, every week, however, once a year, taking a sabbatical, whatever that means for you, just make sure that the activism that you're doing is something that you can sustain for the rest of your life. And the way that I've done that for me is I've made activism more about a work for me. Like this is what I do for work. And that's the way that it's sustainable for me. Like I can do this as a job forever. Now, when I clock out, I tend to clock out. I tend to watch Netflix and just binge and, listen to music. And I kind of turn off that. That doesn't mean if I go somewhere and I see a injustice towards animals somewhere, I'm not going to speak on it. It just means that for the most part in my personal life, people know who I am and what I'm about. So they don't really have to wonder my position on things. But I've made animal rights, I've built animal rights to where it's a thing that I can do for the vast majority of my day. And the rest of my day, I can just decompress. That's what's sustainable for me. For other people, it may be the opposite. Some people may need to have a regular 9 to 5, and then they can do as many actions as they can outside of their 9 to 5. And that's what's sustainable for them. So I would definitely say sustainability is something that is extremely important. Self-care, listen to your mind, listen to your spirit. If you go to a vigil and your heart breaks and you crumble and you just can't imagine going to another one, then don't. Just say, you know what? That's not the type of action for me. Maybe I can do vegan outreach. Maybe I can do leafleting, or maybe I can just help them do recon for vigils. But if it's something that I can't bear continuously, I'm not going to do it. But we can always challenge ourselves and do different things, because disruptions aren't the most comfortable for me, and I can do them, but I just can't do them consistently back to back to back to back to back. I can do them maybe a couple times a week, once a week, whatever feels comfortable for me. But I probably wouldn't be the best person to like do a disruption tour. That wouldn't be what's best for me. But I can do a vegan outreach tour. So I would say listen to your mind and your spirit and your heart, and don't feel that you have to compare your activism to anyone, and make sure your activism is sustainable for you.
That was funny that you mentioned Shannon. For those that don't know, he's talking about Shannon Blair, who's another AAM mentor. And during the Chicago Convergence, man, I just felt like I was giving it my all. Like I didn't have a voice anymore. I wasn't getting enough sleep. And, I just had all this stuff on my mind. I was trying to do all these things. And I felt like Shannon was doing all that. Plus, she did some extra events that weren't even scheduled and led those. Plus, she fixed everyone in that house, which is like 20-something people, breakfast, lunch, and dinner almost every day. And I'm like, how in the world?
Well, how? I'm waking up, they're like, oh yeah, Shannon and some people went to a vigil last night. And I'm like, what? How? When did they have time?
Exactly. So yes, we can't compare our activism to others. I think it's great to use other people as inspiration, and it's also good to try to push your boundaries sometimes. I mean, sometimes there's potential on the other side of uncomfortableness, but at the same time, we definitely have to be sustainable, and kind of the way you are about disruptions. I'm that way about vigils. Like I used to do vigils all the time, and like now I haven't done a vigil in quite a while, probably months. And it's not that I'm never going to do another one again, and it's not that I don't think they're effective to a degree, but it's tough, and it was like crippling me, and it made me ineffective in the rest of the activism that I do. So I appreciate you bringing attention to that. And like you said, it looks different for everyone. So don't be afraid to try to be great, but a great activist. But take care of yourself, in short.
Absolutely.
Yeah, man. Anything else you want to add?
Man, it's a good question. I can't think of anything. I usually tell people at this point of the conversation to check out animalactivismmentorship.com. If you don't have any experience in doing activism, we offer 3 months of free mentorship to anyone that's aspiring to do activism. You get pretty much a one-on-one mentor, and they'll coach you through organizing, how to bring people to events, what type of events, just literally anything that you can think of that may be a hindrance to you doing activism. They will be your sponsor for 3 months. I think a lot of people here probably that are listening probably know about that. So I don't know what else to speak on other than that.
Well, yeah, I mean, we always cover that in the intro and the outro, but I appreciate you going more in depth on that a little bit, because it is, it's what I think a lot of us wish we had when we were trying to find our way through activism. Maybe we would have had an easier time overcoming some of those obstacles. maybe we would have got into activism sooner if we felt like we had a community and some support. So, yeah, I appreciate you being a mentor for so many in an official capacity and in an unofficial capacity with everyone that, follows you and, listens to what you have to say and learns from your activism and the example that you set. I appreciate everything you do. And I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
Oh, absolutely. I'll be seeing you soon, right? In February sometime.
Yeah, we'll see each other in February. Yeah, that's a good promo. Anybody that wants to come do some activism in February, check out the Animal Activism Mentorship Facebook page, and you can see the Atlanta Assembly. We're going to be doing all different kinds of activism and get some stuff done for the animals. So with that, thank you so much, Chris, for being here. Until next time. Thank you again to Chris for being with us. I actually had not had a chance to catch up with Chris in a while, so beyond the podcast, it was just nice to see him on our video call while we were recording the podcast and get a chance to talk with him. I always love hearing his insight, and I appreciate you all so much for listening. Please rate and review the podcast if you enjoyed it, if you think that it provides something important, because it helps others find it more easily when you rate and review. And the more people that find it, the more people can be inspired by the guests interviewed on our show, such as Chris, and we can hopefully turn that into actionable change for the animals. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Animal Activism Mentorship, where you can keep up with the podcast as well as everything AAM. You can also join the conversation in the AAM Club on the Clubhouse app, and you can join our Facebook group, Animal Activism Mentorship Community. One more reminder that you can sign up for a free mentor to help you with your activism at animalactivismmentorship.com. If you needed a sign that you should be an activist for animals, this is it. Animal Activism Mentorship is a free program. We put out things like this podcast. We help people with the one-on-one mentorship. If you want to help us keep our work going, we have a Patreon now, which is a website where you can financially support us in achieving these missions. There's no obligation. Animal Activism Mentorship will always be free in all the services that we provide. But if you're able to give a financial contribution, it would go a long way. You can do that at patreon.com/Animal Activism Mentorship. Also, like Chris and I mentioned in the podcast, the AAM Atlanta Assembly is coming up in February of 2022. This is a chance to do activism, to get hands-on experience with activism, with mentors who are there to guide you, to support you. So if you're interested in this, especially if you're a first-time activist in the streets, please check out our Facebook page and go to the events tab and find the AAM Atlanta Assembly. Click going to keep up with all of the updates there, and we hope to see you there. Remember that it will take all of us to achieve animal liberation, so stay focused, stay positive, be effective, and keep doing your part. Until next time.